Wonderful, thank you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dakota Hufford. I am the Communication and Program Coordinator here at Clackamas River Basin Council. And I'm joined today by Eric Butler, our riparian specialist. And thank you all so much for being here and joining us today in this special presentation to help you be an even better steward of your space, Clackamas Basin. And so I'd like to first take a moment to recognize that we are gathered on the unceded land of many Native peoples. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the many communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. We thank those who came before us for their stewardships of these lands and waters, and those who continue to steward them now and into the future. Okay, super quick schedule. I'm just going to do a real quick CRBC intro. We're going to talk about what climate resilience means, and then get into some details about some climate resilient trees, shrubs, and wildflowers, as well as planting techniques. And then I'll speak a little bit about some climate action you can take, and then we'll end with a Q&A. And we do want to hear from you, but in order to conserve time, please save your questions for the end Q&A portion. And remember, we are recording, so go ahead and keep yourself on mute. Okay, so we are the Clackamas River Basin Council. This is our mission: to foster partnerships for clean water, to improve fish habitat, fish and wildlife habitat, and enhance the quality of life for those who live, work, and recreate within the Clackamas River Basin. We are a 501c3 nonprofit watershed council, and we've been doing this work for over 20 years, invested in restoring and protecting the Clackamas River and its tributaries. We do this through a couple of different things. We do in-stream and riparian restoration projects, such as on the left, the picture on the left, which is a large wood installation for fish habitat. We also host a number of volunteer events and educational workshops such as this, all free to the public throughout the year. The image in the middle shows the Down the River Cleanup, which happens the weekend after Labor Day in September. And we also offer streamside residents with free weed removal and native tree and shrub planting through our Shade Our Streams program, which Eric here runs that program. And all of our work is aimed at improving the Clackamas River and its tributaries, but we could not do this work without people like you. And all watersheds are, of course, worth protecting. The Clackamas River in particular provides drinking water for over 350,000 Oregonians. That's roughly 10% of the state. And so the image on the right shows the areas that get their water from the Clackamas. And the Clackamas River also provides habitat for threatened and endangered salmon and steelhead, and is, of course, a host to a bunch of other wildlife. So again, thank you all for being here and doing your part to steward your lands. So just as a reminder of some of the current stressors that our watershed is experiencing, these issues are caused by and or will add to the burden of climate change. Things like land development, the addition of more impervious surfaces, increased agricultural practices, pollution, and the pressures of invasive species, as well as climate and weather events like heat domes, droughts, ice storms, wildfires, and flooding, along with the struggles of pests and plant diseases, all add up to the overall increased weights being carried by our ecosystems. Expected changes to the climate that will be exacerbated by these issues or vice versa includes wetter winters, drier summers, increased temperatures, and an increase in extreme weather events. I will hand it over to Eric.
So as Dakota just pointed out, the climate is changing, and that's having some pretty significant impacts on really all the vegetation, the landscape around us. It's everything from increasing mortality of a lot of our iconic tree species, increased wildfires and flooding and other kinds of natural disasters, and even just overall increased summer temperatures. It feels like a very unpredictable and unfamiliar world now. Okay, next slide. And there's a lot of conversation about climate resilience. And it's really worth asking or understanding what climate resilience is. Resilience is the ability of any sort of system to recover from an experience of change, whether it's climate change or any sort of disturbance. It's either by recovering, which means it's returning to its original state, or by adapting, which develops into a new state, which is still providing functions. And the changes from climate are powerful, they're complex, and they impact every system on Earth, whether it's natural ecosystems or urban environments, or even our own minds and mindsets. And climate resilience is how we ensure that those systems continue to function into the future, either through creating the opportunity for recovery or by creating the capacity to adapt. All right, next. And in watersheds, the work I do is really focused on maintaining and increasing native plants. And native plants are important because they provide an incredible variety of benefits to the watershed in terms of supporting biodiversity, in terms of protecting natural watershed functions like stabilizing soils and moderating stream temperatures and providing food inputs for aquatic life. But the question is, how will our present native plant communities change as the climate changes? Next.
Right. I also just had a quick note on this, as Eric just said, and of course, as a watershed council, we support a healthy native plant regime, and we tout the benefits of that as often as possible to anyone who will listen. But the changing climate will also take a change in our mindset on how we think about what goes where.
And as Dakota just pointed out, not all native plants have equal tolerances for climate stress. And the stress is especially compounded in the urban environment. The urban landscape is kind of the front line for a lot of these change processes. Cities are where invasive species often show up first. Cities tend to be hotter and drier and more polluted than surrounding more rural landscapes. And from a resilient standpoint, we can choose better adapted plants, and we can also take steps to help them survive. But even with that considered, really diversity is key. The more different kinds of plants you have, the more variety that you have on the landscape, the more likely you are to have resilience, because you're essentially hedging your bets and creating a lot more opportunities for something to work out. Next. And this also raises a question around what's called assisted migration. Our local species are adapted to our historical local environment, but they can't always necessarily adapt to change. And so this is raising the question, should we bring in new populations or even new species of plants to prepare for the future climate that we think we're going to end up with? There is not a simple or straightforward answer to this. It's an open question. There's a lot of debate around this and a lot of consideration that goes into whether to pursue this or not. And as you can see here, there are kind of three different ideas of assisted migration that are kind of increasingly strong interventions. First is what's called assisted population migration. You're essentially kind of moving among seed zones. So for instance, if you want to replant your local woodlot with Douglas firs, you might kind of look for Douglas firs from, say, more kind of the Eugene, Lane County area, because you think it's a little bit warmer, a little bit drier climate down there. Maybe those trees are going to do better in our setting. And the second kind is called assisted range expansion, where we're kind of looking for new species or varieties of species from south of a region, or from places that have climates that we think that we're going to end up with, and kind of helping these species move into our range. And so this might be looking at plants like blue blossom that are, again, common in the southern Willamette Valley, aren't really established here yet. but just kind of bringing them in more with the idea that they're going to be expanding into our range anyway. But then the third idea is what's called assisted species migration, which is kind of the most drastic and most controversial of the three, where you're bringing in entirely new species that wouldn't occur here naturally, that perhaps wouldn't even be able to expand here. But the idea of growing these species that we think would be well adapted to our climate. Next. And so when taking on or when considering any of these approaches, you really want to ask some important critical questions. So things like, can this introduced plant thrive here now? Are there reasons that this plant isn't already established in our range? Maybe our climate isn't quite what it needs yet. Maybe our winters are still too cold. Maybe we don't have the right kind of soils. Also, what ecological functions can it provide? Are we introducing something that's actually going to provide the benefits that we're looking for out of our native species? Or are we bringing something that doesn't have these adaptations and these ecological relationships yet? Conversely, are we bringing something that could potentially become invasive or that would bring new pests and diseases along with it? And are we potentially bringing something that would interbreed with our local populations or species? Could this be maybe be a good thing? Could this maybe be a bad thing? Like, are we bringing in more resilient genetics into our local populations, or are we maybe kind of reducing some of the ecological functions by sort of contaminating the gene pool? And again, there aren't necessarily straightforward questions. There's a lot of research being done on this right now, but it's just kind of important to ask what you're doing before you just start sticking things in the ground. And so when we're thinking about native trees in terms of, or native plants that are well established in our area already, or that are pretty close to it, there are some that we know are likely to do pretty well into the foreseeable future. So Oregon white oak, Valley ponderosa pine, these are two that are very common in the Willamette Valley and kind of drier, sunnier sites. They're expected to do pretty well as the climate gets warmer and drier, especially with our hotter, drier summers. Bitter cherry is another more kind of forest land species, but it's also pretty tough. It has a pretty wide range growing from central to southern California, north of British Columbia. And so there's a pretty wide range of genetics and populations to work with. And bitter cherry seems to do pretty well in fairly tough environments already. So it's potentially another good choice if you're looking for kind of a larger tree in the landscape. There are a lot of native shrubs that are good options as well. A lot of these are ones I work with pretty commonly in my work. Oak leaf, viburnum, tall Oregon grape, and blue elderberry are all pretty well established in our area. They're native, or they're have long tenured native species in our area, and they are again seem to be well adapted to hot, dry, difficult conditions. And then also thinking about introducing some species from maybe outside our range or from different kinds of environments. There are a number of manzanita species ranging from kinnikinnick, which is a low-growing ground cover, up to fairly large shrubs. Yellow flowering currant is a currant species that's more common on the east side of the Cascades, but if we are turning to more kind of a deserty environment where we don't have as much rainfall, especially summer rainfall, it's potentially a good option. It already grows well here, and it's potentially something that's going to serve a lot of function in the future. And then likewise with California lilac, we're ceanothus species. So again, there's some that are already fairly common in the foothills around here. And then there are also a lot of species that are from more south of our region, but are already well adapted to our climate and are likely to continue being highly functional into the future. And a lot of these are ones that we also know have really good ecological values in terms of things like attracting pollinators or creating structural habitat for wildlife. And there are also a lot of wildflowers that are likely to be climate resilient. So things like common yarrow, Oregon sunshine, showy milkweed, Douglas aster, these are ones that again are very common in a lot of our prairie open prairie environments around here, which means that they're already on kind of the hot, dry side of our local climate tolerances. And so again, these are great ones to look at as we expect things to kind of continue trending that direction.
All right, so another action you can take is to go ahead and replace any lawn that you have with an eco lawn. Site preparation and establishment are basically the same for a standard grass lawn, but regular watering is necessary for germination and establishment, especially during the first summer. But after they are established, they take a quarter to a third of the water needed that a regular lawn would. And there's several local commercially available eco lawn mixes, but most include key components that have been tested by the OSU turf grass program. And those components generally include dwarf perennial ryegrass and hard fescue. The non-competitive grasses they're green during winter, but they may go dormant during the summer depending on irrigation. Yarrow, which is drought tolerant and can be green through the summer. And clover, which helps with nitrogen fixation and is drought tolerant and does stay green through the summer. Some mixes include flowering broadleaves such as microclover, English daisy, Roman chamomile, or alyssum. And another choice for a drought tolerant lawn is a dwarf tall fescue blend such as water warden. This turf resembles a conventional lawn but needs much less water once it's established. And I believe their root systems are more complex than commercial sod. And you can get these mixes most places, most co-ops or farmers markets or garden centers. My favorite in town is Symbiop. And another component to helping your yard and your space gain some climate resiliency is to build and protect soils efficiently so that you can absorb the rainfall when it does come. And an important component of this is the storage and the sponging abilities to retain that moisture during the dry months. So some just quick tips. You can add compost to your soil, and that really adds to that sponge and retention. You can maintain a 2-inch top layer of mulch to cover the soil, and that protects the soil biome from weather and locks in moisture as well. If you have a large area of grass or sod that you want to get rid of, we recommend removing these by mulching over the grass until it dies. And that will build up your soil and help prepare the site for other plantings in the future with better root systems than turf has, and helps with overall soil health longevity. And also, if you have slopes or hillsides, plant trees and shrubs in these places, and that'll help provide deeper and more complex root systems that will prevent erosion and assist in that water retention as well.
Good planting technique is also really important for climate resilience, no matter what species, no matter what kinds of plants you're installing. You want to handle your plants carefully before planting. Living plants are really fresh produce, and so you want to keep them cool, don't stress them out too much, don't handle them too roughly, just be gentle with them, give them good care before they go in the ground, and you'll get much better success. Planting timing is very important. You really want to plant in late fall or winter when the plants are dormant. The way I describe is the time that you don't want to go outside and plant is the time that the plants want to be outside and planted. And if you're planting native plant seed, fall is a great time right around the start of the fall rains, because they really like having that winter chill and watering in to get good germination in the spring. Practice good planting technique. I always tell people don't put a $10 plant in a $1 hole. So you want to make sure that the plant is planted at the right level. So there's what's called the root crown. It's the transition between the green shoot above ground portion and the brown below ground root portion. That needs to be right at the soil level. You want to make sure that the soil is not over compacted, but it's firmed up enough that you don't wind up with air pockets. You want to make sure that the roots are free to spread You don't want them too compacted or bent into unnatural positions or left too loose. And so you want to plant in as close to the soil that the natural soil that the plant is going to be growing out into. If you have a container plant that's really kind of bound into a pot or has a lot of really rich potting mix around that, you want to kind of break up those roots, get a lot of that sort of organic mulchy kind of potting mix out of there, really get that good root contact with the surrounding soil. And obviously green site up, plant vertical. Then afterwards, I'm a really big proponent of mulching. I typically, when I'm trying to get plants established, I like to use basically a 5-gallon bucket full of arborist chips that you can get for free from one of the tree trimmer trucks in your neighborhood, or a lot of municipalities have free mulch piles available in local parks. You can call it chip drop and have them deliver a load for free. But you want to think donut and not volcano. Think plant your or install your mulch in a ring around the plant, but with the base of the plant itself still exposed. If you, with a few exceptions, if you actually pile the mulch up around the plant, that creates more problems than it solves. But having that good mulch layer there really helps keep the soil cool during the summer. It helps retain a lot of moisture in the soil. It adds organic matter over time as it gradually decomposes. It's really protecting that plant from competition from weeds as well. And so it's just a good kind of boost to get that plant off to good life. And managing competing vegetation before and after planting. So again, if you have a lawn area or a pasture or something that you're planting in, get that grass, that sod layer out of the way of the new plants that you're putting in. Manage troublesome weeds like ivy and thistles and such. Really kind of get that good site preparation, and then just keep doing your weeding after the plant's in until they're big enough to take care of themselves. And finally, garden adaptively. We are in a time of constant and continuous and compounding change. So we are really all going to have to learn as we go. Even people who do this for a living like I do, we're still constantly experimenting and trying things and running into challenges and adapting. And so it's really important to observe what's thriving, what isn't, and to ask why or why not. What's doing well and why might we be seeing some of the things that we're seeing. Also, it's really worth studying. What have other people tried and what did they come up with when they were trying things? And then from that, do experiments, try different kinds of plants, try different kinds of planting methods. Maybe if planting in February isn't working, try planting in October and maybe have that longer winter period. And what succeeds and what fails when you do it, and then reflect on what you could do differently next time. And finally, share. We all are trying to learn what we're doing. The more that we can share our results and our experiences, the more resources we all have to get more success in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. So that kind of brings to a close the more informative bits of this presentation. But oftentimes discussion around climate issues can leave me feeling fatigued and powerless. But in addition to taking action to make your own space more adaptable to the coming changes in our climate, there are several free programs that help you digest climate change issues and in turn be able to discuss them with other folks. In particular, Eco America hosts a free 4-hour extensive training on climate change science and communication. And American Fisheries and A Climate to Thrive also offer similar ones. So I definitely encourage anybody interested to look at those, and we can send those resources out. And then finally, if you are a Clackamas River Basin resident, please consider, if you have not already, taking our pesticide pledge, which will get you this really pretty nice metal yard sign and show your neighbors your commitment to keeping our water clean. And that is all we have for you today. We'll leave it open for Q&A for a little while. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And thank you so much for being here. Eric, Mark asked, do you do on-site consulting or tips? How would you answer that one?
I guess if you're a watershed resident, I'd be happy to come out and take a look at your property sometime, especially if you have a stream or if you've been impacted by wildfire, or there's a lot of areas that we work in. So visit us at clackamasriver.org, see what kinds of services we offer. But I'm always happy to come out and talk to you, and at the very least kind of give some guidance on best practices, or send me an email. I'm Eric at clackamasriver.org. Give me a call. And I can also connect you, even if I'm not able to assist you myself, I'm able to connect you with a lot of other resources. So I'm always happy to help out.
Yes, perfect. Certainly, if you are in the watershed, please do reach out. And even if not, we can get you directed to the right folks. Gina asked, with the invasion of emerald ash borers, what do you recommend in place of planting ash? And I've been doing a little bit of work with the Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District, and they are recommending primarily red alder and red osier dogwood. And Eric, what do you think?
That is a challenging one. Oregon ash is fairly unique in that it's the one large canopy forming tree in riparian areas that does well in heavy clay soils. Most of our other large riparian trees really like more sandy, well-drained soils, things like cottonwood and willows and such. Red alder is one that can put up with some more clay, but it's also seems not to be very climate resilient. I've actually been using white alder, which is one of these kind of range expansion species, a lot more in kind of low elevation sites, but even it doesn't always do well in the heaviest clay. The good news is recent research has shown that even if you're kind of losing that ash canopy, if you're planting really heavily with a lot of larger shrubs, you can still get a lot of the same benefits, even if you lose some of those kind of higher canopy levels, but you can still get good shade around your streams and some good habitat structure and a lot of fish and wildlife value. So it's hard. We are all going to miss our ash trees pretty hard, but it's not quite as catastrophic as we were worried it was going to be.
Thank you. I appreciate the follow-up with it's not as bad as it could be. Emerald ash borer gets real sad real quick. And feel free, I dropped Eric's email in the chat. I'll put mine in there too. Feel free to reach out at any point if you have questions or just want to touch base with other folks doing this work. And yeah, we are a resource. Hang out for a couple more minutes too, in case anybody has any other questions. And a happy Friday the 13th to all.